I'm Genesis. Standing here in my living room, looking out at the empty street where once stood a symbol of safety and community, I'm reminded of how quickly life can change. The house across the street, once filled with warmth and laughter, now stands silent and abandoned. It's been a while since that fateful night, but the memories still haunt me like a shadow. 6 months ago, I was in a different place, both physically and emotionally. After a long and tumultuous relationship, I needed a fresh start. I found a small 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The lawns were clean, the fences were white, and the people were friendly. It was like a slice of heaven, a place where I could finally feel safe again. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer. Most of my days were spent indoors, surrounded by my plants, a collection of coffee mugs, and my beloved golden retriever, Buddy. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was mine, and I loved every bit of it. Across the street lived Mrs. Thompson. She was in her late 50s, a widow with a heart of gold. She always had a batch of freshly baked cookies and a world of advice. The first time we met, she waved from her porch and said, "You're new here, right? Welcome to the most peaceful street in town." I laughed and took her words to heart. We started chatting every evening. We talked about the weather, my work, and her late husband who had passed away a few years ago. She treated me like a daughter, and I cherished the feeling of having someone look out for me. Most nights, I'd take Buddy for a walk around 9 o'clock, text my parents goodnight, and lock up the house. Mrs. Thompson would always peek out her window as I came home. Sometimes she'd text me, "Saw you walking in. Get some rest, dear." It was comforting to know that someone cared. The neighborhood felt so safe that I started leaving my curtains open at night to let the street lights in. One evening, as I was bringing Buddy back from a walk, Mrs. Thompson called out, "You should keep those curtains closed, Genesis. You never know who might be watching." I smiled and brushed it off, saying, "You worry too much. No one's going to spy on me here." She frowned slightly and replied, "You'd be surprised what lies behind a friendly face." The following weeks were uneventful. I worked late into the night, had coffee on my porch in the mornings, and went on evening walks with Buddy. Sometimes I'd see a car parked down the street, engine off, headlights dim. I assumed it belonged to someone visiting a neighbor. Other times, I'd hear footsteps late at night, but in a neighborhood with night joggers and teenagers, it didn't seem unusual. Then came that cold, still night. I went to bed late after finishing a big project, with Buddy curled at my feet. I must have fallen into a deep sleep because when my phone buzzed at exactly 4:23 a.m. The sound jolted me awake. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, squinting at the screen in the darkness. The message was from Mrs. Thompson. It read, "Stay home. Someone's been watching you for weeks. Please don't go outside." My heart skipped a beat. I blinked at the screen, rereading the message over and over. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake, maybe she texted the wrong person. I stared out the window, but all I could see was the faint light from the street lamp filtering through the curtains. It was too quiet. Buddy lifted his head, ears perked, and growled softly towards the front door. I typed back, "What are you talking about?" But before I could hit send, the 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared, then disappeared. I waited for a few minutes, but there was no answer. I sighed, convincing myself she was overreacting or half asleep. Mrs. Thompson was always worried about little things like locked doors, strange noises, and missing mail. But that uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. I kept glancing at the window, listening for any sound. The night seemed to stretch on forever until my alarm went off at 7 o'clock. In the morning, I felt silly for being so nervous. I opened the curtains, expecting to see the same peaceful neighborhood. But something was off. Mrs. Thompson's blinds were closed tight, and her porch light was still on. And there, on the sidewalk between our houses, were muddy footprints leading up to my front steps. My blood ran cold. I realized then that Mrs. Thompson's message wasn't a joke. It was a warning, one that I had ignored. I quickly unlocked my door and went back inside, locking it behind me. My heart was pounding in my ears. I texted Mrs. Thompson again, asking what was going on and if she was okay. The message was delivered, but not read. I tried to distract myself with work, but my eyes kept drifting to the window. My porch light was still off from the night before, and I could hear the faint squeak of my back gate moving. I remembered closing it the previous evening, but now I wasn't sure. I opened the back door and stepped outside. The yard was quiet, but the gate was wide open, swinging gently. I scanned the fence line and the neighbors' yards, but nothing seemed disturbed. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. Around noon, I called Mrs. Thompson's phone. It rang 3 times, then went to voicemail. I left a message, telling her I was worried. I decided I couldn't sit around any longer, so I crossed the street to her house. Her car was still in the driveway, and her mailbox was empty. The front curtains were drawn tight, and her porch light, still on from the night before, blinked faintly. I rang the bell and knocked, calling out, "Mrs. Thompson, it's Genesis." There was no answer. The only sound was the wind rustling the trees. I pressed my face against the window beside the door and could see her living room. A half-full mug sat on the coffee table, and a blanket was draped over the armrest of the couch. The TV was on, frozen on a paused screen. It looked like she had left in a hurry. I tried the doorknob, but it was locked. Something was definitely wrong. I went back home and called the local police, telling them about the strange text and that I hadn't heard from my neighbor. The dispatcher said they would send someone to do a welfare check. I waited by the window, every second feeling like an eternity. Buddy sat at my feet, whining softly. Finally, 2 officers pulled up in front of Mrs. Thompson's house. I watched as they knocked on the door, waited, then circled around to the back. After a few minutes, they came back around. One of them crossed the street towards my house. He introduced himself as Officer Carter. He asked if my neighbor had texted me the night before. I showed him my phone with the message. His expression changed slightly. "That's a strange thing to send in the middle of the night. Did you notice anything unusual before or after that?" I told him about the footprints, the open gate, and how Mrs. Thompson hadn't answered. He nodded and jotted down some notes. "We'll keep an eye on her property for now. If she contacts you, call us right away." After they left, I tried to relax, but my house felt too quiet. Every creak seemed louder than usual. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 1 a.m. Buddy started barking at the front window. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding. I pulled back the curtain, and for a split second, I saw a dark shape standing across the street, perfectly still, facing my house. I stepped back quickly, my breathing sharp and uneven. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but I knew it wasn't. I stayed by the window for a few minutes, and then the shape was gone. The next morning, I noticed a faint handprint smudged on my front window. It was low, like someone had pressed their palm against the glass while peering inside. That was the moment I stopped doubting Mrs. Thompson's warning. Someone really had been watching me, and now they knew that I knew. I called the police again, and they said they'd send someone to patrol the area. That afternoon, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went to the hardware store and bought motion sensor lights and a small security camera set for my porch and backyard. The clerk helped me pick out one that connected to my phone. It took me most of the day to install everything. Every sound made me jump, but I was determined to take control. As the sun began to set, I sat by the living room window and stared out at Mrs. Thompson's house. Her porch light was still on, just like every night since she'd vanished. It was eerie, like the house was frozen in time. Around 7 p.m. I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked down the street, a dark sedan with tinted windows. It made me uneasy, but I convinced myself it could belong to someone visiting a neighbor. I made sure my curtains were shut tight before turning off the lights for the night. Around 10 p.m. I checked the camera feed. Everything looked normal. Buddy was sleeping by the door, and the house was quiet. I turned off the TV and went upstairs. But as I reached the landing, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the front camera. My stomach dropped. I unlocked the screen and tapped the live feed. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, near the edge of the frame, I saw a shadow shifting by the fence. I zoomed in, and the outline of a man's head and shoulders became clear. He was just standing there, watching my house. My hands shook so badly that I almost dropped the phone. I backed away from the window and whispered, "Oh my God." Buddy started barking, and the figure quickly moved out of frame. I called 911 immediately. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and lock every door. Minutes felt like hours as I crouched behind the couch with Buddy. I could hear the wind outside and my own shaky breathing. Then, I heard a soft tap near the back door. My blood went cold. The dispatcher's voice on the phone was calm. "Stay calm, Genesis. Officers are on their way." I whispered, "He's at my back door." Buddy barked again, and I heard footsteps retreating. A few seconds later, flashing lights illuminated the front yard. Relief washed over me as I saw 2 police cars pull up. The officers swept the yard and found the gate unlatched. One of them said, "Looks like whoever it was ran off when we pulled up." I asked if they saw him, and he shook his head. "No, but your camera might have caught something. Can we review it?" I nodded and handed him my phone. He scrolled through the footage and paused when the figure appeared. "We've had a few reports like this around here lately. Could be the same person." The next morning, I woke up with barely any sleep. I checked my phone, but there were no new alerts. I brewed some coffee and stood by the kitchen window. Across the street, Mrs. Thompson's front door was slightly open. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me. I slipped on my jacket and stepped outside. The air was cold and still. Every sound seemed louder than usual. When I reached her house, I called her name softly. There was no answer. I pushed the door open, and a dim hallway greeted me. It smelled faintly of dust and something metallic. The living room looked untouched, but as I walked towards the kitchen, I saw that the back door was wide open. I turned back to leave, but a small notepad on the table caught my eye. My name was written on the top page in Mrs. Thompson's neat handwriting. "Genesis, please read this if I can't reach you." My hands trembled as I picked it up. The note said, "I don't want to scare you, but I've seen a man near your yard almost every night for the past 2 weeks. He parks at the corner, walks by your house, and sometimes stops near your window. I told him to leave once, but he came back. I called the police, but they didn't find him. I think he knows I've been watching him. Please stay inside at night. Don't open the door for anyone." I folded the note and put it in my pocket. I hurried out of the house, locked the door, and called the police again. While waiting for them, I checked the camera recordings from the night before. I saw the man walking up my driveway, carefully avoiding the cameras. He stopped at my porch, took out a small object, and placed it near the doorframe before walking towards Mrs. Thompson's house. I rushed to my front door and found a small note half-tucked under the welcome mat. It was written in messy handwriting, "You shouldn't have called them." The police arrived and I showed them the video and the note. They said they'd pull fingerprints and patrol the area. By afternoon, an officer came to my door and told me they'd found a dark sedan parked behind an old abandoned house at the end of the street. Inside, they found a backpack filled with gloves, a knife, a flashlight, and several photos of me and Mrs. Thompson. Later that night, they found the man hiding in an abandoned shed. When they arrested him, he said, "I was just watching. She was supposed to come outside." Those words hit me like a punch. Mrs. Thompson had lost her life trying to save me. The days after his arrest were a blur. Police cars lined the street for a week. Reporters came asking questions, but I didn't want to answer. The neighborhood that once felt so safe was now filled with fear. I couldn't shake the guilt. If I had taken Mrs. Thompson's warning seriously that night, maybe she'd still be alive. But over time, I've learned that fear can be a powerful motivator. It taught me to trust my instincts and to never ignore that feeling that something isn't right. New families have moved into Mrs. Thompson's house. They've cleaned up the yard and repainted the porch. The sound of laughter has returned to the street. It's strange, but it also feels right. Mrs. Thompson would have wanted that peace to return. Now, every time I get a strange feeling or see something out of place, I listen to my instincts. I tell everyone I can about Mrs. Thompson's warning, not to scare them, but to remind them that paying attention can save your life. I'll never forget the woman across the street who saw the danger before anyone else and tried to save me, even at the cost of her own life.